Hello and welcome to the EU Parliament in Brussels. Well, it's Thursday, it's the 17th of October. After 1,210 days of dithering, this is the day that the big bananas are in town. That's right. The curious cavalcade of the EU Council has pitched up in our manor. Now, the atmosphere, well, it's been fraught, it's been frenetic and it's been frantic. And that is because in just 14 days, the UK is due to leave the EU. And that has meant the last few days have been a torrent of turbulent turmoil, machinations, skullduggery, devious briefing and hints of possible breakthroughs. But within the last couple of hours, it appears that a deal has been struck between the EU and the UK. So what is this deal? Is it a delight or is it dire? This is BrexBox. Well, no ditherers joining me today, just big bananas. We have Claire Fox, Martin Daubney. Also alongside them, we have Alexandra Phillips, Brian Monteith, and of course the big Chiquita himself, Nigel Farage. Very good to see all of you. Things moving very fast, Nigel.
It's my first smile today. You know, I mean, the language, the deal. It's not a deal.
It's a treaty.
It's an EU treaty. Isn't it funny? The British press keep saying deal, and the Taoiseach and Monsieur Barnier keep talking about the treaty. Very interesting. What have we heard today? What have we learnt today? Well, we've learnt that Mrs May's treaty has been amended. And there are a couple of improvements. Let's be fair. The fact that the commitment to keeping us stuck in the customs union forever now does not apply to Scotland, Wales and England. That is a step forward.
Yep.
No question about that. But the real sting in the tail is that Monsieur Barnier could not have been clearer that we must stay in regulatory alignment if we're to get a free trade agreement. And that doesn't just mean employment legislation or environmental law, it even means taxation. I couldn't believe it when he said it. So the reality is that, well done, Boris. This is now only the second worst deal in history. And this is not Brexit. And yet, David, whatever I was thinking about this, I was at least confident that Parliament would vote it down on Saturday.
Yes.
And we'd have an extension. And I would prefer an extension with a chance of an election to signing up to a rotten treaty. And in the last half an hour, the bombshell. And I simply cannot believe that Jean-Claude Juncker has told journalists there will be no extension. He's done this without reference to any of the national leaders that I'm aware of. I mean, maybe Juncker and maybe Merkel and Macron have spoken to. I just don't know. But if that's right, we have got an unelected, retiring, old drunk from Luxembourg who has just overruled the Benn Act.
Yes.
Now, we may not like the Benn Act around this table, but for the boss of the EU Commission to effectively say, you accept this deal or you leave with no deal, but we have legislation preventing that, shows you this is a thugocracy. It's a deeply unpleasant organisation. It sums up why I want to leave. In fact, I've never, in my 20 years here, been more shocked by any single thing the EU has done than this intervention from Juncker tonight.
But this was obviously very calculated, wasn't it, by Juncker? Whether one doesn't know whether he had a glass of wine before he said it, but
I think we do.
We probably do. But obviously, very calculated, putting pressure back into the UK. And I think, you know, what's your take on it?
Is it designed, and here I want to ask you, Nigel, is this designed to try and force those numbers through on Saturday? Is this a way of brinksmanship to get the ERG back on board, to get the DUP on board, to get the numbers over the line?
There's a bigger question. Did Boris know this all along?
Yeah, well, it seems like it.
Quite interesting thought, that. Did Boris know this all along? So Parliament is faced with, basically, accept this new treaty, there's no extension, the Benn Act's in place anyway. So, now, unless there is some extraordinary negative reaction to Juncker doing this, as we sit here right now on Thursday, it looks like this wretched thing's going to pass on Saturday.
Claire, can I bring you in now? Because I think, you know, in the Northwest, where we're both MEPs, people are confused. I think this is incredibly complicated. And Boris has said, well, we've got this great deal. We take control of our money, our laws, our borders. You know, it's a brilliant deal. So you need to vote for it.
There's a great deal of suspicion, because people have heard it before, when people say it's a great deal, but there's also a great deal of willing on a Brexit champion, and they've wanted Boris to be that, haven't they?
Yeah.
And Nigel's quite right, you know, there's some minor improvements. The tone's different. You know, we all had to listen, because I think that before, with Theresa May, you just got the feeling that this was a treaty written here in Brussels, and that the whole tone was, let's see if we can leave the EU without anyone noticing, without having no difference in anything that's happened. At least Boris has kind of used the rhetoric of sounding like, no, we're leaving, we're going with the will of the people, and so on and so forth. The difficulty is, and I do find it difficult, I don't want to lie to voters. You know, I don't want to look people in the eye and say, look, this is great. This is what we all wanted. You know, even if it means that I'm going to be unpopular, I have to be able to say, look, there's some terrible things in this treaty. And, you know, there's things which I think we shouldn't accept. Your point, though, Nigel, about the lack of choice if they say no extension, I think the whole horror of the last 3.5 years has been feeling as though you are squeezed out of every decision, that you're completely ignored and sidelined. And for them to do this to the Parliament in that way is the final humiliating slap across the face. I don't know what it will mean for Brexit, but I hope it will mean something for making people think about what politics should be like. Because you can't possibly live your life just being done to in this way. Well, being treated with such contempt.
Well, I was going to say, I think people at home feel they're being treated with contempt. I mean, for us, Alex, we were together when Juncker made this statement, and we've said personally it's been a rollercoaster because we don't really know what's happening from day to day. What's your reading of this? Do you think this is all about forcing a second referendum? In which case they could say this is not an extension; it's a second referendum.
Well, look, it depends how. It depends. Look, he hasn't come out of the European Council meeting. He said something off the cuff as Juncker. He does that. But, look, there's a couple of things to say here. A, is this going to really put the thumbscrews on the Westminster lot to vote it through? Are they going to believe it, or are they going to say, OK, let's call his bluff and let's not pass it and then see if the EU want to go down the no-deal route, because they probably don't? I don't know. That depends on your interpretation of Juncker, and I'm sure a lot of lawyers on the Remain side are sitting there right now going, but if we vote it down and Benak says this and da-da-da-da-da, and, you know, will they budge? But going back to what Claire was saying, and what Nigel said, this is an international treaty, this withdrawal agreement. International treaty, it goes on forever. Now, if you do it in the photo negative, not what leftover bits of EU have we got stuck with us, but let's say all of a sudden we're doing an agreement with America, and America said, OK, for futurity, the UK has to follow all of our tax schedules. It has to follow our tariffs. It has to follow our standards. Anyone would say, that's mental. Why should we do that as a country? You have to follow what we decide to do in foreign policy. The list goes on of the things we have to follow. Now, what this is, you know, people look at it as a few remaining bits of EUism, but otherwise we're free. No, we're supposed to be fully free. And if you take this for what it is, if it was drawn up brand new with a different third country or operator, everyone would be outraged by it.
Yes,
Doesn't it guarantee a second referendum?
Sorry?
Doesn't it guarantee a second referendum? Isn't what Juncker's... I mean,
yes, it does.
I mean, who was on Eurostar yesterday?
Yeah.
Who was on Eurostar
Well, everyone,
yesterday?
I think. All the Remainers.
David Lammy.
They were all here.
I mean, they were all... But you saw them all together. I mean, it seems to me, you know, and I've been here longer than all of you, you know, I've seen the Irish twice vote against the EU treaties to vote again. I remember very well the Danish voting against Maastricht and being asked to vote again. Isn't this the big Juncker ploy to make sure we get a second referendum?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is firstly trying to game the vote on Saturday. Juncker's trying to ensure that the vote goes the way they want, and we can see by all the hugs and kisses that they think the vote's good for them. That's worry number one.
They're far too happy.
Worry number two is when you hear Oliver Letwin's going to back it, that tells you as well it must be bad. But not only are they gaming it for the vote in the House of Commons, I would fully expect that the EU will then come back when the council meeting's finished and actually say, yes, it's off the table, but leave themselves open to come back afterwards and say, OK, you have voted against it. And second thoughts, we'll give you an extension if you have the referendum.
Exactly. And Nigel,
that's where
But they may
that's
not
what I
need
think.
it.
They may not need it.
But they may not need it because he may have forced the hand of Parliament so much
Indeed.
that it happens on Saturday anyway.
But I think they can still come back to it if that doesn't happen.
And of course, if this does pass on Saturday, remember that at the end of this whole process, the one place that absolutely has to vote for it or can veto it is the European Parliament.
Yes.
Indeed.
So, looking at these timelines, we'll probably have a vote on this next Tuesday.
And what do you think the numbers are here in terms of approving it?
Here's the great thing. In the United Kingdom, MEPs have always been considered to be second division politicians.
Yep.
And the attitude of the press, even the serious newspapers like the Times and Telegraph, is we cover EU events on page 18 under foreign news. It's sort of over there, it's south of Calais, and it doesn't really
Yes,
affect...
that's right.
And I've been screaming for 20 years. Actually, most of the legislation that affects businesses, industry in our country comes from here. So I've done my bit to try and raise the profile of the European Parliament, ironically. but in the rest of Europe, the European Parliament is considered to be much more important than national parliaments. So delegations here, for example, the EPP Christian Democrat group, led by that, I mean, if you think Germans are humanists, meet Manfred Weber, God help us. And you know, he sits there leading the biggest group in the European Parliament. Do not think any comment he makes is made independently. Merkel will be on the phone to him 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah.
So the answer to your question is, the groups here will do what their prime ministers tell them to do.
Yeah.
And if the prime ministers are happy with the deal, it will sail through the Parliament here next week.
But-
Fine.
If we get to that.
But it might be that at that level you could have amendments like you should have a second referendum. Could that be where it would come up? Or do you think the second referendum... I mean, this is the question. Everybody was talking today, before all of today's news, in terms of UK politics, of a second referendum being attached on as an amendment to the vote on.
Yep.
It seems to me that that's the way that you would not have an extension, but as you say, have a second referendum. Are there going to be explicit suggestions of that, or is that actually a UK thing?
No, they're too clever for that.
Right, okay.
You know, Juncker can play this extraordinary card today. I think Juncker is politically brighter than to be seen to be the man that forced the UK to have a second referendum.
Right, okay, so
if the UK Parliament makes that decision on the back of his blackmail, he can live with that. So my suspicion, Claire, is, you know, a lot can change, but my suspicion is that this Parliament will vote for it quite heavily.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so's mine. I did want to just say one thing, because I think that what's happened that's driven me mad over the last year and a half, or the whole thing around Theresa May, is that we've actually forgotten what May's deal is. Yeah. And one of the most infuriating aspects of recent discussions has been the obsessive concentration on the backstop. Because what, of course, happens is, actually, there's a rather clever... I mean, the DUP might not like it, but there's a rather clever dealing with the issues around the backstop. He can say there's no backstop, and so on and so forth. I think we've got to remind... I mean, I want to say to everyone, do we know what's actually in the agreement? Can we remind ourselves? Yeah. So I just wanted to say this one thing, because I'm so horrified by it, even though I kind of knew about it, that basically the political declaration ensures that the UK can't take any action in foreign policy terms likely to conflict with or impede EU foreign policy. So I want to say that again. The UK is prevented from taking any action likely to conflict with or impede EU foreign policy on this treaty.
Yeah.
Now, the whole point of being a nation-state is you have to be able to do that. And I just was hanging out. I went to one of the Kurdish demos up the road, right? And I saw them, gave a bit of solidarity. Say the UK independently decided it wanted to do something, whatever, in relation to Turkey in support of the Kurdish people who fought ISIS. Guess what?
And also,
the EU say we're working with the Turks. We can't do it.
We've all spent a load of time going through this declaration today since it was released. Page 14, it'll make June mummeries, make her heart bleed.
The fisheries gone.
The fisheries situation is genuinely heartbreaking. It says here, point 71, the UK will be an independent coastal state, yet goes on to talk about a non-discriminatory manner of access to our stocks, which of course means, European-wide access, shared stocks, quota shares. Fishermen have been sold down the river.
Quick story on that, if I can.
Yeah, go on.
So on Monday night, we had a big Brexit Party rally down in Cornwall. And some of the local fishermen knew that I was there and said, will you stay Monday night? I said, yeah, I'll stay. Early Tuesday morning, went out, had a Mevagissi, I have never seen anything like it. The shoals of bluefin tuna that are off the south coast at the moment are just mind-blowing. I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of fish stretching from Penzance up to Brixham. It may even be millions of fish. They are average size 200 to 300 pounds. Average value at market 12 to 15,000 pounds. They're there. They arrived in August. They won't leave till Christmas. They've now become, for the last 4 or 5 years, part of what we have in the southwest. We get all these negative stories about the environment, about species decline. There are some good stories
there are.
out there as well. Have a guess, folks, around this table, what our commercial quota catch is for bluefin tuna in the UK.
Tiny.
0.
Well done, Bram.
Zero.
The French,
Yeah.
the French and Spanish has been increased this year from 18 to 23,500 tonnes, and that's just ones that you land to market. If you put the tourism dimension onto this, so charter boats, angling boats in the southwest are forbidden from even targeting these on
Right.
Rod
You
Land.
have to put them back, and any bycatch in a British boat has to go back.
You're not even allowed to target them.
Yeah.
Now, this is just one little issue. I took Richard Tyson to see it. Of everyone says, oh, fisheries is a tiny part of our economy. Actually, in parts, I mean, Cornwall's one of our poorest counties in the whole of England. Here we have the answer to a maiden's prayer, and yet because of the EU, we can not do a thing about it. And because of what Boris is going to agree to tonight, there's still nothing we can do about it. And these are the human stories, I think, about struggling communities that we got to get out there more and more and more.
I mean, in many ways, they've played a very clever and long game, haven't they? They've frustrated the people because this has gone on so long that people are so bored and they just want it dealt with. And, you know, despite the fact that, you know, all of us spend a lot of time trying to rebut it and saying what's wrong with it and why Theresa May's original deal was wrong, somehow that hasn't got back. All we've been talking about is Northern Ireland. We've been talking about Ireland. And so...
Clever them.
Yes, clever them. But is there anything that we can do from here? And I'll throw that to everyone.
Well, I mean, I think that, I hate to mention this, but we've got to change politics for good.
Well done, brand ambassador,
well done.
yes.
But I'm sort of serious because I think that whenever you go and talk to voters, they will say Brexit means more than Brexit. And we might well have been shafted. That is the truth, right? We might have lost this one. We might leave on this deal. I'll be delighted to see the back of being an MEP, it has to be said, on the 31st of October, if I'm packing my bags. And do you know what I will enjoy? The kind of Remainiac side of people being miserable about that decision. But it won't be at all what I've fought for and what we've all fought for.
How long will it take the public to wake up to this,
And it's
though?
too late then, because there's no exit clause from this. This is what I was going to say. That's the risk.
But we can't, you know, we can't do an Extinction Rebellion in as much as we can't physically prevent them doing it. I mean, if it's a stitch-up, it's a stitch-up. But what I think we can do is use this to really reinvigorate politics, because although some people will say, OK, I'll go along with it, already I'm beginning to have people sort of contacting me saying, oh, God, Claire, is it as bad as we think? And the problem is no one's asking them.
No.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, they're irrelevant to this conversation.
So, Brian, if you're a Remain Member of Parliament, what is going through your head at the moment, given what you've just heard today?
I think if I was a Remain Member of Parliament, I'd be secretly happy.
Why?
Secretly happy, because I would be looking actually at Nigel Farage and Claire Fox and Martin and Alex and thinking, they're worried that this will be adopted, therefore it must be good for me.
Right.
I see, reverse psychology.
Reverse psychology.
Yeah.
I just as we look at Oliver Letwin saying it's good, no, I honestly think this is a good deal for Remainers. It's a good deal for Juncker. They wouldn't be offering it otherwise. And much as there's a lot of Remain MPs that will vote against it, they're voting against it because of partisan party politics.
Yeah.
But if they were looking at it from the perspective of EU, then they would see it's a good thing.
Alex, last night you were doing maths. You were counting up the votes, you were tallying them up, and you said the votes just aren't there. So in terms of that, do you feel that it has changed, like Nigel says?
Yeah, no, it's no. Before, I would have said yesterday 100% the votes aren't there, and that was based on thinking the DUP might actually back it. And then the DUP didn't back it, and this morning I was like, the votes are not there. But that was when no deal was taken off the table. It was going to be an extension and the opportunity to reverse. Ever since Juncker said extension gone, then everybody will be thinking, or actually will they be thinking, it's whether they are thinking, OK, if I don't back this, it's then no deal. They will be hunkering down right now, the Remainers. You'll have Julian Morm, whatever his name is.
Yes.
So I always forget. Sorry, Joe. He'll be sitting there going through his paperwork, Green. They'll all be hunkered down. Like, do we have to back this? They'll be on the phone to their counterparts here, possibly on a next Eurostar back out. They don't want to vote for this, but it's whether or not they'll be second-guessing whether or not what Juncker has said in an off-the-cuff remark has legal weight, whether that's going to actually stick.
24 hours, a long time in politics. Do you think it's a slam dunk now? They'll be pushed, they will be sort of coerced into voting for this deal. Do you think that this is game over?
I don't think anybody in the country has got a bigger personal, political, and perhaps even emotional stake in this subject. I gave my life over to this back in 1993. I don't know why, but I did. And I've never, ever given up, David, fighting for it all the way through. And those that have known me a long time, Alex has known me a long time, will know that I've been the most optimistic Duracell bunny you could ever possibly meet. And I think right now, sitting here talking to you, it feels like the darkest moment I've seen in this whole journey. So I'm feeling right now a little bit shell-shocked by what Juncker has done, and I'm with Alex, I mean, all this Sky News, 330 are going to vote, it was all rubbish. It's all rubbish. There's no way this was going through. There's no way
As
this was going through.
us this morning.
Like he's done it.
No way. David, I'll tell you this. I'm never down for long.
Well, we know that.
If it comes to it, and even if Boris got short-term electoral relief from having been seen to have delivered Brexit, believe you me, whether it's 3 weeks or 3 months or 18 months down the line, people will realise that the last 3.5 years were the easy bit.
Yeah.
We're now heading into a period where they literally... Oh, by the way, have you heard Barnier has been appointed to conduct the next phase of the
course he
negotiations.
has. He's so good,
how
though.
marvellous.
He's so good
Well, he
for
should be on
them.
our side.
I know, he's so good for them.
We are headed into the worst period of political humiliation our nation's ever seen. And at some point, Mr. Johnson and his friends are going to pay a huge political price for that. I shall make sure of it, don't you worry. And there has to be a general election fought, whether it's this one or the next one, where clean break Brexit is the only option. So, short term, very down. Longer term, I'll have them yet.
Well, we will keep you to your promises with that
Okay.
one. Sadly, that is all we have time for this week. Thank you to all my guests and, of course, the big banana himself. One last thought, though, talking about bananas, and this might be applicable to you. If your head is about to explode from Brexit overload, and if you are in a dark place, it is said that bananas contain a small amount of chemical called Musa sapientum bananidine, which apparently is a mild, short-lasting psychedelic. And at this rate, you might need one. Banana, anyone? Goodbye.